some common bad postural habits? And I mean, I really hesitate to use the word like bad, like who's to say, but unhelpful postural habits that people carry that maybe we can help you move away from if you think, oh, this might be me and I kind of thought this was a good idea, but maybe it's not. What are some examples of that, Mike? Do you have a couple that come to mind right away that we could elaborate on?
Yeah, I think one bit of low-hanging fruit, so to speak, could be the sitting position that people often find themselves in. As we all know, or maybe you don't know, I don't know, we'll find out, but sitting with a slight rolled forward hip, slight curve in your lower back when it comes to optimum desk working position, arms at 90 degrees, elbows by your side, helps a lot.
Yes.
So when people kind of relax, they slump, that lower back flattens out, that can do some harm to your spine, to the muscles in your hip that keep you nice and strong, especially when you're standing. That's one common thing I see, which I'm sure you've run into as well.
Haven't seen it. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, right. No, completely new over there.
Not here. No, absolutely. And I think just that idea, the notion, there is still this very understandable misunderstanding that when we talk about posture, it's, well, okay, shoulders back, chest up. And like how you present is being used synonymously with posture. And while your posture does dictate how you present, there is a lot to be said for, okay, this isn't about just sticking your chest up, shoulders back. Posture is the alignment of all of your joints. So sometimes if you're finding yourself, and we've heard a lot of clients say, I have a hard time when I'm at my desk. I try to remember to pull my shoulders back and sit up straight, but then I can't hold it for very long. And to your point, it's hard to hold it for very long if your pelvis is not supporting you right underneath. Then you're operating from perhaps, quite possibly, oh, that's just my desk. If you're slouching like this, and the slouch is actually coming from maybe a posterior tucked pelvis, and then you're trying to sit up tall over it, that's not comfortable and it's not sustainable. So the alignment of your chest and shoulders is going to come from your hips.
That the hips are the foundation to all movement, really. I mean, we don't move from our shoulders. So sitting, it's the first contact point from the ground or from the chair. Making sure that you're nice and level in your hips goes a long way to let your body kind of relax into that position.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, the muscles in the back of our neck, like just in the back of our back.
On the back side of my back. Yeah.
Muscles that are back, those are on all the time to make small micro adjustments to our posture till we can stay there, but they don't drive that movement. Solid foundational hip stability goes a long way to letting your back do its job.
100%. Something that was coming to mind, and it's a little bit in a different vein. It's about the stuff we manufacture to create good posture. So for example, coming from a dance background and like Pilates as the primary form of physical therapy for a lot of us, it was such a paradigm shift to learn that you do not need to constantly brace your abs to support your spine for good posture.
Yep.
I think this might appeal more to women on the whole than men, but I know just over years of conditioning, there's this tendency to like suck in your stomach or like brace your abs, and men too, but like definitely I know that that's very there for women, like bracing your abs so that your abs are like flatter, and then you're also supporting your spine, and then that starts to move up the chain to shallow breathing. So we can unpack a lot of this, but bracing your abs, as tempting as it might be to think, well, yeah, that I'm constantly engaged and this is helping my spine, because look, if you were to punch me right now, nothing would happen. But just go around asking people to punch you. But what that is like, then that's kind of saying that your alignment on its own is not enough. You need to be constantly in a state of flexing.
I love that point. No, I love that point. It's just like, you yourself aren't enough to hold posture. You got to do some extra stuff. It's a great point.
Yeah. And no, you don't, right? So to circle back to what you were saying about sitting, the pelvis and the hips are the foundation of all movement. And so if your pelvis is neutral, you are already going to be in a place where your abdominals can help to support your spine, and your spine is meant to move. I kind of think of this as a palm tree. A palm tree can like wave in the wind, and it is strong because of its flexibility versus being rigid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of bracing your abs and then inhibiting movement in your spine is starting to create a compensation that's not going to be helpful. So start today. Relax your abs if you feel yourself tightening them. And this also is going to help you access better diaphragmatic breathing. A lot of people, women especially, but men too, shallow breathing, chest breathing, feeling like you hold tension in your neck and shoulders. This all starts to like come as a package deal, you know?
Mhm. Well, I mean, I've been taught to breathe all chest rise and fall,
Yep.
whereas
Yeah.
one way to think about it too, big diaphragmatic breaths, you're trying to access your diaphragm muscle. Imagine your stomach is a balloon inflating with air and
Mm-hmm.
exhaling and,
Mm-hmm.
deflating with air. So
Mm-hmm.
allowing the stomach to really expand and, you're getting all the muscles, that diaphragm fully involved. And also too, the psoas, one of the major hip muscles, interacts with the diaphragm.
Yes. Yes.
So
So if you're noticing a theme that hips are coming up a lot with these questions, it's because it is all so interconnected, and the psoas truly connects your spine to your legs. So your this muscle connects your trunk to your lower body. So like you said, it does work in tandem with the diaphragm. Have you had experiences with clients where they are definitely like shallow breathers, or they've talked to you about, you can even see in posture photos that they're bracing their abs? Like, have you seen this? Yeah.
oh, yeah. Yeah. And for some people, ab work is helpful, but I feel like it's a very common go-to method of fixing a lot of these things where for that individual may not be what their body needs.
Yeah.
Uh, you can
Especially for
tell
long
like if,
term.
well, I'm sorry.
Oh, I just, when you said I see it and sometimes it can be helpful, but it shouldn't be like over an extended long term period that you're manufacturing this.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can certainly tell posturally if there's a lot of tension in the upper body, they're trying to breathe all here. They're not allowing full access of that breathing muscle, so they don't get real oxygenation in their system. That can be also pretty tense. If
Mhm.
you don't get full deep breaths, sometimes people who are a little bit more anxious will tend to more chest breathe versus full, deep, relaxing breaths.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it can manifest physically as well as emotionally too.
Yes. And it was interesting to kind of hear that, like, if you're more anxious, you'll breathe this way. And then the converse can be true. Short, shallow breathing can make you more anxious because it like flips that switch in your nervous system too. So there is definitely a feedback loop with psychology and physiology really working off of each other. And we already knew that, but it always bears repeating.
I mean, I feel like I've mentioned this in other Ask Me Anything, like Answer
Yeah.
the Public things, where the mind and the body are so interconnected because they've done a lot of research and studies on how your physiology affects your mental state. So,
Mhm.
like, if you may not be in a great mood, but how often do we say, okay, just put a smile on your face and your mood will uplift. You'll start
Oh,
to
yeah.
feel a little better, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
if you stand with a good standing position or a good sitting position, whether
Mhm.
it be in an interview or you're about to go to an important presentation, put yourself
Yes.
in these positions, that's automatically going to start to trigger certain psychological effects in your brain for the better.
Yes. Yeah. And what's interesting is, because I think we're going to touch on this topic, we got a question from Anna, and she asked, bracing your abs when you're working out is okay, basically, or like when lifting weights in the gym, is that okay to brace your abs when you're doing that? What
Mhm.
would you say?
I would say sure. I mean, it's good. It's not a bad thing to train those muscles.
Hmm.
We want to
Hmm.
train the abdominals to integrate with all these other parts of the body as you're working out.
Yeah.
Uh, The hang up is when people hold on to that when they're done throughout the time.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. Yeah. I was I was trained as a trainer. That like especially it's also just getting all the muscles activated. You don't want to be soft in your center when you're lifting weights because that can make you more vulnerable to, I'm using general terms here, but like instability, right? So when you are engaging your abs, not only is it like more work and exertion that helps with your conditioning, but it does help to keep your hips in the right position. To your point, it helps to support the spine so that any sort of upper body work or squats, lower body work, you're not going to want to have your abdominals totally disengaged. It's true that actually squats are an excellent abdominal exercise for that reason. So yeah, that's a good distinction to make. That I'm glad she asked that.
Yeah. Thank you, Anna, for that question. It's a good one because training the abdominals is like training other muscle. You want to integrate it with all these different exercises and movements so that when you do disengage, those movement patterns stick.
Exactly. Yeah. What are some other postural habits that are super common that are not helpful?
Well, and again, it's no fault of people who do these. You're not doing anything wrong, but it's just like when it comes to optimum standing position, I would put money that if you were to walk down the street right now and you observe people walking, the amount of people who are walking with a slight flared out foot position is pretty prevalent.
That was the next thing that was on my mind too. Yes. And where might that be coming from? Where's the root of an everted foot position coming from? It might be something we've mentioned before.
Mm-hmm. Could it be the tight psoas?
Yeah, can you maybe explain that for our audience, how the hips have anything to do with why our feet turn out?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about your legs, if this is my leg, this is the ball in the leg bone, and this is my hip, right? It's going to go into the hip. The position, the direction of your leg is dictated by the muscles in your hip. And if you think about what we do all the time, we do a lot of sitting, and not just individually, but as a society, right? The muscles in the hip, if you're sitting, those muscles are going to tighten up over a long period of time to where they're used to being short. Now, the psoas or the hip flexor, one of the hip flexors, its job is to bring your leg up closer to your chest, but also to point your leg outward. So if a muscle is tight, it's gonna have to shorten by nature to be tight. So when it's tight, it's doing its motion of rotating out. So people just hold on to that tightness. That's one symptom.
Yes. Yeah. And that's definitely brilliantly explained. And so that can be one cause. And then also, if there's an imbalance in the hips, you might notice that one foot flares out more than the other. And we can go down a rabbit hole of compensation and dysfunction there. But usually the side where that foot is splaying out it's doing that to help provide the stability that the hip isn't. So you have a broader base of support when you're stepping on that foot. And usually, not all the time, but usually that is the foot that tends to have the developing stages of a bunion.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Typically. Yeah. Why would that be?
Because instead of getting that proper toe off with your foot in a parallel position, pretend my hand is my foot, and this is my heel. What are you doing? So the palm is your heel, right? And then as you're articulating through the foot and then you're toeing off, if your foot is parallel, great. But if your foot is everted, what's happening is, I'm going to fold my thumb under because I want you to think of the index finger as the big toe. If your foot is everted and you're going to toe off this way, you're pushing the big toe toward the other toes when you're walking with your feet splayed out. And that's usually how that starts to form. The beautiful thing about that is you can also counteract, like you can counter that by getting your hip and your knee and your ankle operating more parallel. And restoring proper hip and ankle function, you can actually start to stretch out and undo the bunion formation.
Yeah, right. A lot of it has to do with, again, coming from the hip.
Yep.
Affecting down to the foot and ankle. You got something, you got a bunion going on. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily the foot's fault for doing that.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
problem coming up from the hip, you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of the time. Yeah. Or the opposite hip, depending.
Mhm.
And we have another great follow up question from Anna: why the knee can be rotated inward and the foot outward? Ooh,
Great question. She's asked some
great
awesome questions.
question. Yes, please, because I know I just went on about these bunions. So this will be fun. We can talk about tibial torsion
Oh,
by
this
all
is
means.
great.
Yes.
So the knee, right? So the
Mhm.
kneecap is pointing inward and the foot is pointing outward, right? So what's happening there is the kneecap is a great indicator of what direction your thigh bone is pointing. And the foot will tell you with relative accuracy, pretty good accuracy, what direction your shin bone is pointing. So the knee by nature can rotate a little bit. That's a completely normal biomechanical thing that happens when we stand up, when we
Yeah.
flex, there has to be a little bit of a twist. But in extreme cases, that knee will develop more of a twist if there's a muscle imbalance in the hip, right? Whether it's over strengthening of your inner leg muscles that rotates the leg inward, or some
Mhm.
weakness in the psoas, it doesn't have the strength to
Mhm.
counteract that rotation.
Mhm.
There's going to be a muscle weakness forming, and then the foot is going to compensate. So it's going to pretty much prevent that knee from diving too far in,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Just trying to help.
It's
Yes.
trying to help. And so I'm sure you've seen people where they'll come into the clinic, their feet are pointing way out, but those kneecaps are dead straight.
Totally.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah. And so that would then speak to wanting to undo that tibial torsion, or basically counter rotation that's occurring at the knee as a result of internal rotation in the femur, if this is, the case we're talking about, and external rotation of the, would it be external rotation of the tibia?
I would say so. Mhm.
Okay, because sometimes it looks like even the tibia is rotating in and then the foot is splaying out too, which can happen.
You're
I would,
talking more like rotation at the talus itself.
yeah, it can
Yeah.
seem like that. But anyway, yes. So wanting to undo that counter rotation is big, and it's totally possible. Like, we've helped people with bowed legs and knock knees and all of that, and it's amazing how quickly it can change too.
Well, and it's great, Anna, that you'd recognize that there's the tibial torsion present, but then the question is, why is it present? Like,
Absolutely.
what advantage does your body get for twisting at the knee? What's not happening above the chain that needs to happen?
Yeah.
There's a bunch of muscles that rotate the leg outward,
Mhm.
so as glutes, your abductors,
Mhm.
trying to identify what muscle is not doing its job.
Mhm.
Who's to say that leg can't straighten out? It definitely can.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So those are great questions. Are there any other big? I think the feet, bracing the abs, trying to sit up straight when you're sitting down. Those are all really common sort of compensatory posture habits.
Mhm.
Is there anything else that comes to mind before we jump to the next subject?
I would say perhaps one other thing that I might see a lot in walking, specifically, is an unevenness in like arm swing.
Ooh, oh, technical.
Very a little
Um,
bit. This is something that's completely self-conscious to a lot of people. I had one person come in for their first session. She had some shoulder pain, like some shoulder blade, upper back tightness and pain on her left side. We
Mhm.
watched her walk. Her right shoulder was completely frozen when she was walking, and
Oh,
she's
wow. Okay.
she's my age, like 30s, relatively healthy, nothing really going on.
You wouldn't
Her
expect this. Like, you wouldn't expect this from people in our age group. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
But like, even that her symptomatic shoulder was working much harder than her frozen side.
Functional stuck shoulder. Yeah. Because that other side was doing all of this work to help.
Exactly.
And the thing, this is a great reminder. This is true for the hips. This is true for the fact that we have two sides. Impacting one side or doing something directly to one side does not only affect that side by itself. And with the shoulders or with the hips, if you think of a seesaw, okay, when someone comes to sit on this seat, yes, this seat will go down. But when this seat goes down, the other one is going to go up. So we have to make sure we're looking at that relationship. So to your point about like this shoulder was frozen, so this side has to do a bunch of work and this side hurts, but it's not like this side hurts. What are we going to do about this? It's like, well, let's unstick this guy, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's I don't know if I answered the question in terms of postural. I think I answered it more in terms of like movement.
Yeah. Well, there's still like helpful and or helpful to discuss, and I think we were going to talk about like working out and coming up. Something that I was going to say, I think for many people, and myself included, it can get tempting if we haven't done a menu and our hips are maybe a little bit tight, or you go from sitting. I'm sure this is a lot of us right now. If you go from sitting to, okay, I want to get a workout in, right? And if you're, let's say, weight training or doing kettlebell swings or yoga or running or whatever, in the absence of hip extension, what can happen is either pushing the pelvis forward to feel like we're extending our hips or swaying our low back. So that idea of like this for hip extension. Right. But what's actually happening is compression or swaying the low back, but we're wanting to feel like we're completing a full range of motion in the hips, but instead this stays stuck and we thrust the whole unit forward. And that shows up, you know, whether it's working out or actually just walking, running. How often do we see this where there's like so much movement in the back, but the hips and pelvis are stuck? And we're like, but look, I'm extending my hips, but instead you're just really extending your back.
Yep. And those people no doubt have come to us with low back pain.